appreciate the opportunity to be here. And I guess you've already figured out I'm not from New York. I'm from South Florida. I can speak English most of the time. I can write a lot better, so I might say Kane. But I'm from South Florida. Most of you not too far away. We brought Kane. She's from our Atlanta office, Municipal office, so she speaks better English than I do probably. But anyway, we're glad to be here. We want to talk about several things. And we've already got an introduction, but we do have 5 offices, one in Dublin, one in Robinson, Atlanta, Kennesaw, and Raleigh. We're a full-service CPA firm. We have about 98 team members. Sometimes that fluctuates over 100. We have multiple designations. We have almost any kind of service that anyone would need. One that really stands out besides the CPAs is the CIA Certified Internal Auditor. Is what that stands for, and we're going to talk about internal auditing just a little bit later here. But our firm, we have more certified internal auditors than any other firm in the state of Florida. So we're kind of proud of that. We have some of the other ones. They sit me off. I've got most of these. Only reason is I can pass the test. That doesn't necessarily mean I know a whole lot about it. I guess pretty good sometimes. But that's about our firm. That's a map with our locations again. We already talked about that. But the agenda that we're going to talk about this afternoon, first we're going to talk about 2 internal control frameworks. You've never probably, you may have heard about it, but one is COSO and the other one is CODA. We're going to talk some about budgeting, and actually 10 years, budgeting, capital budgeting, and SPLOS, forecasting, and some templates and some Excel worksheets that we have that you might find useful, some little tools that you may find useful. And first off, internal control. Everybody probably understands what internal control is. That's an academic definition, but it's an entity process affected by the entity's board of directors, etc. So that we can provide reasonable assurance about operations, financial reporting, compliance with applications and regulations. We're going to get a little more interesting here in a little bit. We're going to talk about some fraud red flags and such as that probably, and I probably have a few war stories I can tell you about where instances that I've been in or seen over my 25 or so years in public accounting. There's 2 cues that you'll see if you go to school now. My son, he graduated not long ago from Auburn, but he's at the University of Georgia now. He's in law school, so we don't make Bulldogs mad. But if he starts barking, I'm not sending any more money up there. But there's the COSO, which is the Committee of Sponsoring Organizations of the Treadway Commission, and that framework is about financial reporting. The other framework, which is just as important, and most people don't think a whole lot about, but are the internal controls over information technology. And you probably see in the paper, or if you ever had your identity stolen, anyone in here ever had their identity stolen? That's a bad problem. I had someone in my office the other day, and he makes a lot of money, and somebody stole his identity. They filed a Michigan tax return on him, and he hadn't even been to Michigan anytime here lately. He certainly never lived there. So that kind of parlays in what we're going to talk about, some of the controls over the internal information system that you probably have in your municipality. And the name of that, if you want to know what it is, control objectives for information and related technology. Here we go. The COSO framework, we're going to talk just a little bit about some of this, and we're going to get to stuff that's more interesting. COSO framework has about four parts that they updated this framework. Now, when I went to school a long time ago, they didn't call it COSO. They just called it internal control. And when I was in school, I probably went to sleep. So I'm going to try not to put you to sleep when we talk about some of this, because it can get academic. But part of it now is an enhanced risk assessment, which if you had your external auditors come in, they probably do a risk assessment. If you had an IT auditor come in, they do a risk assessment. Sometimes you may not know about it. We're going to talk about a little bit what that is. They added a component on the COSO framework about information technology. And they really expanded that. And I'm going to tell you some war stories about some municipalities that we work with that actually have a lax internal control system over their information technology, and people have stolen sometimes large amounts of money from them because of that. Fraud risk assessments, they've added that. That's kind of all the cyber crime and things that you see happening today. They've added that, they've expanded it. And another thing they added was the outsourced service providers, which that's really just vendor management. We do a lot of work for financial institutions, and a lot of these, I read an article in the paper the other day that a lot of companies, particularly foreign countries, the way they get into the U.S. companies is they find a vendor that's on their supply chain. They try to get into the corporate office, they're pretty well secured. They figured out they can go through a vendor that's linked into that supply chain, and they can get all the way upstream to the corporate office. And that's happened sometimes when your identity has been stolen, or debit cards and such things as that. When Target fraud, that's not exactly what happened there, but the Target thing where they stole everybody's cards. So identity theft is a big thing. Information technology, some people in vendor management is becoming a real big thing. In the banks that we go into now, the FDIC has vendor management way up on their list. And the reason I bring that up, if you have any outsourced service providers and you're a municipality, and if they touch your computer system, make sure you have adequate controls around those that link there. That's how people can get in. Now, I know when they don't, I moved to Warner Robins about 12 years ago. I don't think they asked me. I can't really remember. But I don't think they asked me, usually they ask me about your social security number and everything on all the applications. Well, that stuff is, when I grew up in Eastern Georgia, when I bought my first house there, I'm sure on the water bill, power bill, whatnot, social security number and all that stuff is in their system some way. And a lot of cities don't get that information, or if they do, they keep it really sensitive about who has access to it. But these people that try to break into your system, that's what they're looking for. The internal control components, we're going to talk a little bit about each one of them. I'm not going to spend a lot of time on this slide because the next slide is more practical. It's set up the same way. But the 5 components of a really good internal control system is the control environment, a risk assessment, control activities, information and communication, and monitoring. Now I'm going to flip to the control environment. That's a little bit more practical application of what we're talking about there. But commitment to confidence, board of directors, and the audit committee, and really, we used to do a lot of work until they raised the limit pretty high. Sarbanes-Oxley, we have to go in and do an actual audit on the internal control system. All public companies, if they're over a certain capital, have to have one. But the most important piece of that control environment is the tone at the top. The people who are actually in charge. If they think internal control is important, everyone else probably will. If they don't think it's important, no one else probably will. So think about that. Sometimes I found in some cities that we go to, some small, some large, they don't really have internal control, but they really don't give it the credence or the thought that they should. And too long ago, we had one city, they called us over, and they thought this lady had stolen some money. And actually, we went and did a fraud investigation, and we could prove in just about a 3-week period she stole about $20-something thousand. And it's simple. They weren't really paying attention to the internal controls. We'll talk about that a little bit later when we get to IT. And the reason she was able to perpetuate that fraud is because all their systems, IT systems, weren't linked up. They were doing a lot of manual journal entries. And you need to. That's why when we come and do an external audit, we look at all the journal entries. That's what we're looking for. Journal entries that are wrong and out of place. The risk assessment is kind of self-explanatory, and I got another slide coming up that talks a little bit more about it. But one thing that I found in my career, see the last bullet point on that risk assessment section there is managing change. A lot of times when people come in and an employee is terminated or you hire a new one, there's some change going on there. And I found that a lot of people don't actually look at the access controls on their IT system. You know, who can get in, who can do what. We were doing some work for a really big financial institution. So we were doing an IT audit, and we got a data dump of all their employees and the access rights they had to all the modules in their financial reporting. You know, the loan package, the receipts package, deposits. And we found 26 people that had complete access to everything in that, all applications in that bank. And the bank didn't even know it. So if you had any change, people coming in, IT people changing out, make sure you have those access controls. You know who's got access rights and what they have access rights to and not, what they don't have access rights to. We see that more and more when we go in and do that. Some employee will be terminated, or someone will come in and leave, vice versa. You know, sometimes they just change, but nobody goes in and takes away the rights. Control activities. The main thing there is, we already talked about the IT portion, but the policies and procedures, you need to make sure they're up to date. A lot of smaller municipalities don't have written policies that they probably should, but they have a lot of procedures. Make sure that those procedures address the risk they are intended to. Make sure you understand why somebody's doing something. Information and communication, that's pretty explanatory. Self-explanatory. Audit reports, board reports, and my other life I was on the school board. I ran one time, and unfortunately I won, and I wasn't smart enough not to do it again, so I ran again, and unfortunately won again. But you know, it really hit home to me, that information and communication when we were doing that, because I'm a CPA, so I understood all the numbers. But a lot of people on that board didn't understand the numbers, and they really didn't understand about internal control. And you know, so you need to pay attention. And after I explained to what some of the numbers meant, they actually had a new light on. A lot of times they get confused, and Tammy will probably speak to it a little bit more. Fund balance, they thought that was money. That's not cash. They get confused about that. Monitoring activities, follow-up activities, job evaluations, remedial activities. When the auditors come in, if you have the internal audit department, when they point out you have a problem, make sure you get it remediated. You know, tell you for a reason. It might come back. It's showing over here. But you know, make sure those monitoring activities, when the external auditors come in and give you a management comment, you may not always agree with them. That's fine. But if they tell you something about internal control, try to address it. There's two terms that inherent risk and residual risk. This has to do with the risk assessment we're talking about. And this is somewhat of an academic slide, but just think about it when you're putting together a policy or a procedure. Figure out what risk you're trying to address. I've seen some bad policies written up, and they really don't address the risk that they were trying to do. But the controls or the policies and procedures, and what you want to do is get the residual risk. That's the risk that remains after the control has been put in place. That's what you're trying to get to a minimum. When the external auditors come in, or if you have the internal audit, you know, it's sometimes good to take a look at that risk assessment. Make sure that the controls. What I found most of the time is someone thinks they have a control that addresses a fraud risk or something. It really doesn't do that. So look at that and pay attention to make sure they're all lined up. Now, IT is a bit more interesting here. IT risk assessment. Now, this slide was from 2012, I think. But $100 billion is lost annually to cybercrime. $100 billion. And it costs $157 per record. $157 per record for every breach that happens. Now, we see a lot of this. We do a lot of tax returns. Even I got several emails this year during tax season, and they were very crafty emails. They had stolen somehow our client's email, and they were pretty close to one of our clients. but actually one of my clients, but they sent an email and then it had a Word document attached to it. And it says, the body of the email says, here's the tax information that you have requested. Well, I figured this is a scam, but actually I forwarded it on to the IT department, and what actually had in that email was a ransomware. And if I clicked on the Word document, all of a sudden, they would have polluted our whole system, or could have. And we had some other checks going on upstream. But, this IT, it's a big deal. And if you think about it from municipality, think about all the information that you have on all the utility customers, whatnot, all the customers in there. That's what information they're trying to get to. We had a fairly big city. We never found where anybody stole anything or got anything. Nothing ever happened to our knowledge. Now, whether they actually stole anybody's Social Security number and all, we don't know, but it was pretty close to a military base. And someone actually broke it and gotten into their IT system and pilfered around. And they didn't even know until somebody came and tried to do a penetration test, and they got in. They got in within 2 minutes with their system. Now, they really knew what they were doing, but think about all the sensitive information that you have there in your municipality. And people they're out constantly trying to get in. Some of the IT controls that you should have, there's actually more than this, but the general controls, make sure your server room is secure. If you have a server, make sure it's secure. When I mean it should be under lock and key, and only a certain few people get in that room. I walk into some cities and it's wide open. I can walk in and with a jump drive, most people have blocked off the USB ports, but I could have gotten about almost anything I wanted to. Data's backed up. Now, this is not quite as big a problem as it used to be, but the first when I started out, we had these big old tape reels, and you're supposed to test them. About half the time they didn't work when you try to restore it. But make sure that your backup system, make sure it's tested from time to time. Most of the time it's done digitally now, but make sure that whoever you, sometimes you outsource that, sometimes you do it internally, but make sure it works, that the backup is actually working. Software update approval, segregation of duties, they're just as important in an IT system, sometimes more so than just a regular general internal control system over your financial reporting. Computer operations, and make sure your data is secure. Applications, make sure you have those unique passwords. Now, I hate them too. I got more passwords, I can't even remember all of them, and they want you to change them every 30 days. But I don't know if you've seen this. I've seen it a lot. I went into a bank, it wasn't too long ago, we were doing an IT audit, and this elderly, she's older than me. I'm getting 53, so I guess I'm getting on sort of up there. But anyway, I said, hey, I need your password so I can check something. Well, she knew I was an auditor, but she gave me her password. Don't give out your password. And what I've seen, a lot of common things I've seen too. Somebody's going to be out, they'll say, well, here, I'm not going to be here. We got to do the payroll or something, so they'll loan someone their password. Make sure that they're not doing that. And it's about as much for their protection as it is the other person. So, those passwords are there for a reason. They're rotated every 90 days, whatever the policy is, it's done for a reason. Another thing I've seen when someone purchases a new software, and this actually happened to one of our municipality clients, they bought a really nice system. But they didn't interface all the general ledger, and the AP, and the payroll. So this lady, she was very smart. She figured out how to get around all that, and that's what the lady, she stole up over $20-some thousand that we could find in a 3-week period. She could have stolen more than that. But, when you get new software, get the manual out and read it and understand it. We bought software in our firm too. I know how these people are. Once they sell it to you, that's what they wanted was the money. But make sure they train you how to use it and how to set it up. And make sure you have these controls, these internal controls. And I got it in red down here. Internal controls are achieved in different ways, but just as important as your regular internal controls. So, reconciling bank statements, two people signing checks. It's just as important in an IT system. This is just a diagram of general controls and application controls. We talked about those, but the general controls are the things that all surround the application controls. Just make sure that you have good general controls and application controls. Cybersecurity, are you really secure? I want you to think about that. Are you really secure? People after personal data, identity theft is on the rise. We've had at least 3 people that had their identity stolen in our office here in Taxi. They'll file one lady. Now, they made the first time I'd ever had it happen was about 6 years ago, and these people made over $1 million a year. So she got a little notice in that says, you filed for the earned income credit. And I said, no, ma'am, somebody stole your identity. And she had been to New York City. They traced it all the way back there. Someone had stolen her identity there. And it was, if you remember, about 6 or 7 years ago, there was a scheme going on up in New York where they were actually, a lot of people got together and they were stealing identities and they were filing fraudulent returns and using the earned income credit. That's a refundable credit. You don't have to pay anything. You can still get a refund. That's exactly what they were doing. They got her identity and it was part of that. It's real. And I'll tell you, if it ever happens to you, it's a pain in the rear end if they ever steal your identity. But phishing and e-scams, ransomware, had another client, just happened right about Christmas time. He hit one of those emails on the ransomware, and that's where they hold you hostage. You got to pay money for them to turn your system back over to you. I didn't recommend it. He paid him like $6,000 or $7,000 to do it. But you never know if they're going to free it up or not. You don't really know what they did. I didn't recommend him doing that, but that's what they did. But it's a problem. The way you can make sure you're secure is to have a penetration test. That's where you hire a third party to come in and see if they can break in. And you'll be surprised how many times they actually can. Now, these people are trained to do that, and they can be pretty sneaky, but if you're having a lot of sensitive data, particularly in the banks, they have to have a penetration test every so often. I mean, it's that critical. A lot of insurance companies have to have one. Fraud, how to detect fraud. These are some statistics, but I tell you what's interesting. If you see 49% happens in financial services, 49% in retail, 48% in the communication industry, 41% in hospitality, but look at the next one, 41% in government. So it happens a lot. You ought to be aware of it. You can see the other industries that it hits, but I found, we're talking to the government, it's 41%. It's happened to them. The fraud diamond, this is just, they used to have a fraud triangle. That's what when I came out of school. Now they have a fraud diamond. It's basically the same thing. But, look at the 4 characteristics. They have an incentive. Look and see if the lady I told you had $20,000 she stole, they put her in jail. But what's interesting about that, this lady had done something similar 2 times before. Nobody ever did anything. They just terminated her and nobody said anything. 2 times before. And I've seen that happen a lot. Not just there, but in other places. People say, we don't want to go through the trouble, let's just get them out of here. But I tell you, if they've done it once, I believe you can be changed. But if they've done it one time, it's likely they may do it again. There's the rationalization, they do it a few times and they get to thinking, it's easy, I can do it, it must be okay. They have an opportunity. They have a knowledge of the systems. If someone really understands the IT system, that's why those access controls are really important. Make sure you know who has access to what. Because they can perpetrate fraud. Some of the red flags, just to look at, lifestyle changes in an employee. The lady that had gotten the money, they just paid a little attention. They bought a new boat. They had a new car. There were several things that indicated something. There was some money coming from somewhere. look at that. Refusal to take vacations. In my former career, I worked for a family. They were very wealthy. They owned banks and timberlands and whatnot. We had one guy who never take up his officer in the bank. He never would take an extended vacation. He'd only take a Friday or a Monday. Well, he came in. The controller saw that he also on the weekends he ran a hunting preserve for his uncle, who was a doctor down here in Macon. And anyway, his pay went up like $1,500. I don't remember, but it went up to $3,000. And the lady was processing the checks. That's when you actually process the checks in the bank. Noticed it went up, so the president said, "Well, that's probably okay." But went down to the little branch, the neighboring town, and said, "I need to talk to you about something." Well, he thought we caught him on the real fraud. We were just going to ask him about why did his checks go up $1,500 to $3,000, whatever it was. Come to find out, he never would take a vacation, and he had stolen over $900,000. And but he didn't take those vacations. If you have someone who does not want to take a vacation, I'm not saying they're doing anything, but think about it. Because he had to be there to perpetuate this scheme he had going. That's why he couldn't leave. He couldn't take a vacation. Some of the other things to look for, and you can read them. I'm about to turn it over to Tammy, but look at things under management. If you have a weak internal control environment, county personnel lacks frequent changes in external auditors. That's a sign. Some important things about red flags. Don't ignore a red flag. Studies have statistically shown almost in every case there were some red flags people ignore. So don't ignore them. Also realize sometimes an error is just an error. Just because you see a red flag doesn't mean anything. It doesn't mean there's an indication something might be there. So, tread lightly, but look into it. And the key point there, be aware and respond appropriately to red flags.